Hello, welcome to Toffee TV. I am joined in the studio by award-winning journalist. You are Joe Thomas, Everton's correspondent for the Liverpool. You are, just facts, you are an award-winning journalist.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm not lying, am I? You just won an award, so there you go.
Thank you.
There you go. I'm getting the light stuff out the way at the introduction, Joe, because obviously...
Trying to ease me in.
Yeah, I'm trying to get myself out of this cobbling I've got. Obviously, Joe, the big story, which is you have to be living under a rock the last few days to have ignored it, is Everton's 10 points deduction. Found guilty by an independent commission, or found guilty of breaching PSR. The 10 points is the hammer blow, really. I think most of us thought there might have been an issue, but hoped it might be a suspended sentence or a fine, or even like a squad reduction of 2 players, which has been used in the past, or a transfer ban for a window. Don't think too many really thought it was going to be the 10 points that Everton have been given. So, I mean, what was your initial reaction when that ruling came out?
I don't think anybody thought points initially. Then when that story came out, must be about 10 days or so ago, saying that the Premier League had campaigned for that and pushed for points. I think at that point we could start to see where the mood music was heading, and I think dealing with the club, I think that they themselves at that point probably started to think, oh wow, this could end up down that route, and as a result of that, they kind of needed to mobilise a little bit. But obviously, the extent, the severity of that punishment, I mean, it really is unprecedented. Obviously, for top flight football, and it's unprecedented when you look at the context of punishments that have been handed out for other offences. Obviously, Everton have been made an example of, because they're the first team to ever kind of end up in this situation. But there is a track record of other clubs getting points deductions, including Portsmouth, 9 points for administration, and I think that I think some of the shock that's in relation to 10 points given to Everton has to be the fact that, well, administration is given the impact that it has on your local community, the footballing pyramid, obviously the clubs that then don't get paid for transfers, the players potentially don't get paid, the contractors, the businesses caught up in the local ecosystem. Well, set against that backdrop, you'd say that's probably more injurious to the integrity of the Premier League, and yet Everton end up with a more severe sanction. And as a result of that, I think that's where some of the shock lies. But yeah, I really was surprised when I saw 10 points. Not necessarily that it was a points deduction, but I didn't think it would go anywhere near that extent.
Absolutely, and you're right. I mean, Everton could have gone into administration and been better off, which is the most craziest scenario I think that you can come up with. The fact that, like you just said, it affects so many different people on so many levels. People that lost jobs, the football club. Some people have in the football club trying to be more prudent. It's had to let people go, but it would have been big job losses. Players wouldn't have been paid. People who were owed money wouldn't have been paid, like you say, clubs with transfers. And that's something that the Premier League supposedly set up this PSR to avoid. It was on the back of Portsmouth and what happened there. But clearly the thing isn't, I'm saying this, not you, isn't fit for purpose. It doesn't work. All it's done is create a huge gulf within the Premier League. And it doesn't help clubs, quite clearly, because the Premier League have reportedly been working closely with Everton for 2 years, and have still ended up, shopping them, so to speak, or complaining about what was a payment to do with the stadium and stuff. But in terms of an appeal, because obviously Everton have indicated that they've started the appeal process straight away. Can you, when you look at it, do you see this being reduced? Because 10 points, just like you said, if administration's like the worst, and it would be, I think, for most people, how is this even bigger than, how have the Premier League or an independent commission ruled that this is the worst thing that's ever been done in Premier League history? Because Everton haven't won trophies off the back of it. They haven't, been in Champions League and enjoyed all of that money. I mean, if you've watched Everton play in the last 2 years, you won't have seen any sporting advantage whatsoever. But is just quickly on the appeal, do you think there's a possibility the points may be reduced?
I think there has to be a chance. I think from the outset we have to understand that Everton aren't appealing from a position by saying their innocence. Everton admit that they've breached this. So there's a dispute between them and the Premier League as to how much they've breached it by, but they're not turning around saying no punishment necessary because we're innocent. So that's important to bear in mind. Where it gets really difficult to try and work out what's going to happen next is the fact, and I think it's a legitimate grievance that a lot of people have, including Everton, is that for all the depth and insight that's within that 41-page judgment handed down by the Commission, there's no real explanation as to how they reached 10 points. There's a framework that's put forward by, as a suggested framework that was used for the EFL, where almost starts at 6 and then you get an extra point for every 5 million over the threshold you are, which would get to 10 points. But strangely, the Commission seemed to decline to use that, but then come up with the same answer that would have got. But the fact that they don't go into detail explaining how they got there, well, on the one hand, Everton will probably have grounds to appeal there, because they say, well, without your workings out, we can't see it. So how can you say this is fair? How can you show how you've got there? On the other hand, they might be fully confident that it's a perfectly acceptable sanction and be able to show their workings out to whichever commission asked the question of the commission as to how they got to 10 points. So, I think that there must be a reasonable chance of having it reduced, but I don't think it'll get any better than that for Everton. I don't think the nature of the penalty could ever change from deduction to fine or transfer embargo or even suspended, because I think that there'll be a willingness, as we've seen from the Commission in this case, to deal with this immediately and not have it as something that's hanging in over the future. It's a sporting sanction that happens now. But I think the hope from Everton will be that the mitigating factors that they put forward get treated with a degree of more seriousness, and they get a bit more clemency, and also that they'll think that they have a grievance in the fact that the 10 points isn't really explained, and they'll hope to get that reduced, and that'll be the best case scenario, I think.
Do you think there might be a situation where it will get reduced, but so say it'd be like, I don't know, 6 points, but with 4 points suspended over this happening again? Or do you not really think that? Because obviously they've put out, haven't they, now the Premier League, it's clear that the clubs can be done again and will be, they'll be looking at everybody in the same boat now, and whoever goes over it will be given this. I think they've thrown out this 6 points immediately for failing it. So Everton are well aware of that. If Everton fail it again, the other 6 points is coming again down the next season or whatever. Do you think there might be the case of a suspended, or do you think if it is reduced, it probably will just be whatever it's reduced by, and you suck it up and see from there?
Yeah, it's impossible to say, really. I think all that will matter to Everton will be that if there's a reduction, that it comes in immediately, and whatever suspension, if there's a suspended element to it, then that's to be dealt with in the future or to be dealt with on their other accounts. I guess part of it will probably be a case of what everybody who is invested in this, how they see prosecutions going in the future, really. They've obviously set a precedent. They've now seen the reaction to that. They know what's coming down in terms of the financial picture for lots of different clubs for future seasons. Obviously, they'll be soon in the process of assessing the last financial year and things like that. So I think it'll all depend on whether or not the Independent Commission is happy, and the Premier League is happy with the message that's been sent already. Do they think it's been hard enough, or do they think, oh, actually, look at the reaction, we might have gone a little bit too far? So I think there'll be a degree of politics coming into it and PR, really. I think any change to Everton's punishment, if their appeal was to have any kind of success, will be more of a judgment on how this punishment is being received rather than on the weight of Everton's arguments, which they've already heard.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is again, like you just said, we have to be clear. No one's really sitting here going, Everton are innocent and they've been done innocent. What's happened to innocent till proven guilty and all of it. We know that Everton it's there. Everton have gone over the £105 million losses, so therefore there should be an element of punishment. I think most Evertonians would go, okay, we breached it. The club, we all knew that the club wasn't being run in the way that we felt it should have been. So it's no surprise, really, that it's gone over it. But it is that severity of the punishment, because I'll be honest, I expected the suspended points thing. I really did. I didn't see that, you rob a Mars bar and get a light sentence for it. Like I said before, if Everton had gone £150 million over it by spending, buying 4 players for like 35 million, whatever, on top of it, when people were going, shouldn't really be doing that, and we've blown it apart, then I'd get that. But the fact that the figure is, 19.5 million at a time when we're building a stadium, there's a global pandemic. I keep saying it, there's a war between Russia and Ukraine, which cost us big sponsorship money. Now, you can bat them off and go, well, that stuff happens, but global pandemic doesn't come along very often. Building a stadium it took us 140 years to do our what's our third stadium in the city, to build that. And obviously a war isn't an occurrence that happens all the time. That stops, that takes a big chunk of money out of it. So those, for me, if you were trying to work alongside the football club, if you're the Premier League, I think you should have been looking at those scenarios and going, right, okay, I get it. That doesn't happen very often. That certainly doesn't happen very often. And that really doesn't happen very often. So all of these that go in the melting pot has probably made you overspend. And especially when Everton are saying, rightly or wrongly, it pertains to the stadium, the tax on the stadium and how money was spent. An overspend during that period of, 6 million a season? I think someone said it equates to 6.5 million a season. That doesn't seem like a massive sporting advantage to me in a league where players out of League One can cost £6 million nowadays. And yet, I think that's what's frustrated the football club, that these big things have gone on, and yet they've come up with the harshest ever penalty. So that's why I believed it would be something like a fine and a 6-point suspended sentence, maybe carried over for 2 to 3 years, for Everton to continue to evidence that they're going in the right way, rather than trying to play, across the line.
I think the Premier League would say, and they probably have some merit in this, and when you're taking all those things into account, they'd say that there's already significant allowance has been allowed for things like the pandemic, and also the stadium as well. Obviously, a lot of the stadium costs aren't included within the profit and sustainability calculations. And in relation to COVID, well, we've seen that Everton have claimed far more back in COVID losses than any other club in the Premier League. And the fact that they've done that and still only breached this by £20 million suggests that the vast majority of those add-backs at the Premier League that Everton have tried to claim for have been approved by the Premier League. So they would argue that, we are giving you so much leeway and you're still over the limit. You've got to remember that concern for the Premier League starts with a £15 million loss over a 3-year period. It's at that point that they start to step in and have conversations with the club. So £105 million is a hell of a long way over that as well. So they're saying, well, we'll give you a £15 million bit of grace. And then there's a further £90 million on top of that, where we can kind of have conversations with you, and all right, it'll stay behind closed doors, and it might not be full-on sanctions that are going to come out in public and hit you immediately, but you've got to be working with us. For having to do that and then still cross the threshold, I think that's why they think this is so severe.
What do you say to people who say, well, the 105 million was at a time before inflation was so huge like it is now? It's gone up and up and up. Someone done a calculation saying, well, if you'd done it correctly and if the Premier League were working correctly and with transparency, that figure would have gone up to 140 million, which is what it should be, because when it was put in, we're in a totally different universe than where we were when that figure came in.
Yeah, I think what we've got to be careful of a little bit here is that a lot of the argument since Friday is focused on what are essentially financial technicalities, specifics of the rules, interest on loans, and whether or not those loans have gone to the stadium or whether they've gone to working costs. That's what a lot of the focus is on, and that's what the argument is. Crux of the matter is, did that tip Everton over the edge or not? That and things like transfer levy and where that went, the 4% that Everton pay on transfers, or clubs pay on transfers when they make them, when they go to youth development. Now that's where a lot of the focus has been. But we're only arguing about those specifics and those handful of £1 million here and there because Everton got so close to the threshold in the first place. And there has to be an acceptance. And I think there's an acceptance from Everton fans, and it frustrates me because I don't think that fans of other clubs, when they're engaged in whataboutery and criticising Everton fans for their frustration here, is I think that there's acceptance from Everton fans that this is a club that hasn't been run particularly well over recent years, and what this penalty really is it's a judgment, and it's quite a damning indictment on the excess of the Mashiri years, the way in which ambitions, the dual ambition of building a new stadium and trying to get into Europe were pursued. Lots and lots of money was spent without really much regard for the complying with the regulations. Obviously, it was try and get Everton into a position where it's having success, and then the success will pay backwards. And obviously, we know the sporting performance went backwards rather than forwards. That's one of the reasons Everton got into trouble. So I think it's still really important to bear in mind that Everton are in this position because essentially they made themselves vulnerable by not following the rules and by engaging in what was effectively some risky financial practices over recent years because they got too ambitious. They flew too close to the sun. I do, however, think that, like what you said there, it is clear that Everton have been hit by a number of unforeseen and unpredictable circumstances. This is a unique period that Everton have been at their most vulnerable in. Not only has this happened at the time when Everton finally came into a bit of money and tried to spend it, which made Everton more vulnerable. That could have happened at any time. Could have happened when Chelsea were trying to do it, embark on the same thing, or Man City. It happened when Everton did it. But a lot of those issues that have made things particularly difficult for Everton, it just had absolutely no forewarning of and couldn't really predict. And I know that there's an argument within the Commission and from the Premier League that a lot of these things are market forces and things that business should be aware of. But when you look in the context of Everton breached the cap as high as it is by £19.5 million, they didn't need absolutely everything to go to plan to be compliant with the rules. They just needed one of these things. They just needed Richarlison to go for 80 million, not 60 million, because as they hoped he would do, and they'd have been compliant. They just needed obviously Russia and the invasion of Ukraine. Well, potentially, obviously the Commission said they didn't see the documents say this, but there was suggestions from Everton that they were on a particularly lucrative contract with USM for stadium naming rights at that point. Well, that had gone, they'd have done all right. It's only really the sale of one more player that has cost them. So on the one hand, it's bizarre given how much Everton have had to work with that they've got so close to actually being compliant with the rules. And there's extent of credit and mitigation deserved for that. But I do think fundamentally we have to also recognise it only allowed itself into position because it went so far over the line in the first place. And that's a conversation that obviously we've had many a time during the course of this calendar year on here already. So yeah, but bearing all that in mind, where have they come from? Where's 10 points come from? For saying all of that and for all the conversations that we had, I think it's a perfectly legitimate grievance of Everton to go, all right, look, we're guilty. We deserve punishment. But 10 points? Like what? Where's that?
Well, you know what, you're right, because I'm speaking here and going, well, we were 19 and a half, but that is allowing the football club to lose £35 million a year, which it should never be. That shouldn't be the safety net which you work. You should be trying to create profit I get it. It happens. I get it. It happens sometimes, but we shouldn't be like saying that's okay. That shouldn't really be the business practice that we're in, and hopefully as we move forward, and we've kind of evidenced it, certainly on the transfer aspect of it, we've moved into a better place in the last couple of years. We haven't, I keep saying that the net spend over the last 5 years is Everton are third from bottom in it. And when you include clubs that gone down, we're even lower than them, which is bonkers really, in what we've spent, because even though there's a narrative out there from sensationalism journalists that Everton spend all of this money. The reality is, when you look at it, they don't spend all of that money. And in fact, the net spend across Mashiri's time, I think, is only something like 180 odd million or something, or 190 odd million, which it's still a lot, don't get me wrong, but it's not 700 million, which we're consistently told we spend. But again, so hopefully Everton do arrest some of that and continue trying to work more prudently, because that's the only way the football club's ever going to improve. But it is a mad one when you look at it and go, 10. Well, where's the 10 points come from? If you're using the Richard Masters scale, which is what he wanted in, then okay, at least you'd know where it's come from. But for them to dismiss it and go, no, we're not using that, but then do something. But even using the Richard Masters scale, you can't round up. Which they have round up, because 19.5 million ain't 20 million. So the 4 extra points should really have only been 3. It should have been 9 points. So they haven't even done what Richard Masters said. So it is a bit of a weird one. Moving forward then, obviously, what have you found Evertonians' reactions be? And obviously there's 30 grand almost raised in, or 40 actually. 30 so 36,000 I've seen before towards banners and stuff. The United game's going to be tasty, isn't it, for that first game back?
It's going to be intense, and I quite like the fact that obviously it's going to be 4:30 kickoff under the lights and Sky. Live on Sky, beamed all over the world. If ever Everton wanted Everton fans have got the platform that I'm sure that they want to convey their emotions at this ruling and to do it to a global audience. This isn't a 3 o'clock at home, with all due respect, this isn't a 3 o'clock at home to Bournemouth or away to Burnley or something like that, where you've got a small portion of a grand and a couple of banners. This is Goodison in all its glory, isn't it? So I mean, I think that's going to be an intense the atmosphere on Sunday, and I think that I think that the severity of the punishment has galvanised the fan base, and we know how powerful it can be as a positive force, and I think that in terms of the short term, I think the immediate impact is that this does create that siege mentality. It is Everton against the world. Sean Dyche will be using that with his players. Look at all the great work you've done so far this season, how it's been undermined by men in suits. That's what he'll say. And similarly, fans in the ground, the nearly 40,000 Blues will all be there saying, this is just the latest example of Everton being made an example of to, instead of other people. So I think that would be quite a powerful force to harness. Where my worry would be is if things don't quite go right on the pitch. Obviously, Man United are very, very beatable, but they also have some wonderful players. Like if they turn up and win, and then Everton get a couple of suspensions for the next yellow cards for the next games, and that mood could dissipate. That where it could hurt sporting performance. But to be honest, in a very strange way, and I don't want to be flippant. We've entered an international break with Everton, 8 points clear of the relegation zone, and we're going to leave it with them in the relegation zone.
Could only happen to Everton.
It could only happen to Everton. But, and as I say, not trying to be flippant or naive, to a certain extent, I think Everton as a club almost emerges from this stronger because all of a sudden it makes it far easier for the club, the fan base, to unite as a force against the world, which is something that we perhaps haven't been able to see for the past year or so, and going back a little bit further. And I think that's I think that's a very powerful thing, and hopefully what it'll do is just spur the players on the pitch, and also get a very, powerful message across to the powers that be during Sunday's game, and I'm sure after then as well.
What do you make of the cries for an independent regulator? Because obviously this is something that's come out. I think there's a petition out there now demanding all fans sign it, not just Evertonians, just to try and get clarity, I think, within this, what was a fantastic sport. So I think the Premier League decided to ruin it, which that's my personal opinion. They've made it worse and worse and worse. But there is a call for an independent regulator. I mean, what do you make of people's opinion that this Everton are basically the sacrificial lamb to prove to the government the Premier League don't need an independent regulator? That's nothing new. That's been put out by quite a few journalists. Are Everton the sacrificial lamb? I mean, what do you make of that take on it?
Well, I think it's fair to ask whether or not it's a coincidence that the Premier League handles out its harshest ever penalty, precisely at the one time where it looks like it's finally lost a battle over whether or not an independent regulator will come in. That is it one last throw of the dice? Well, I'm not going to say either way, but I mean, when you look at the scenario and the wider backdrop to which this commission has heard its case in, you can understand why some people might be willing to push that narrative. I'm all for an independent regulator. I don't see how it could be a bad thing. I think one of the problems that we have with the current system, first and foremost, is the consistency. We've already discussed 10 points in comparison to 9 points for administration. We could go back further, and I know that fans of these clubs don't like us mention it and like to say it's not relevant. But you look at the Super League, the breakaway. Obviously, they were not trying to break away from the Premier League. They were trying to break away from the Champions League. They would have stayed in the Premier League competition. But by making the top tier of European football a closed shop, they would have completely undermined the sporting integrity of the English football pyramid. And we look at they got essentially each of them paid £3.5 million.
And at the moment there's no evidence they paid it, by the way.
So so when you start looking at the consistency there, then that's problematic. And I think one of the problems with the Premier League as a regulator of itself is that when you look at the Commission's report, it would have you believe that all of this investigation into Everton is about protecting the sporting integrity of the Premier League. But everything the Premier League does, it may all be trying to protect the integrity of its competition, but it's also trying to protect its own reputation as well. And you have a dual. You almost have a dual approach there, where it's trying to be a fair and independent arbitrator, but also trying to do what is best for its brand as well.
Absolutely.
And what's best for its brand? Well, I'd say, you know,
I know what you're trying to say, Joe.
I'd say it's very helpful that they have some of the biggest sporting clubs in the world
course.
continuing to have success.
Of course.
I don't think
listen,
that's
I'll say it.
Controversial. So.
I'll say it. I mean, you know, I've seen Gary Neville done an interview with Richard Scudamore, who was the CEO, and talking about an independent regulator. He got very upset, very angry over it. But this is a fella who, it's out there, basically said we can't afford Manchester United to be outside the top 4. And they got 15 penalties the following season and things like that. So we know what they want to happen. It's like anything. If you had a business where you went, if I do this, this and this, we'll create more views and more money and stuff, you would do it as a business practice. The problem is when it's a competition, then that feels really unfair, and particularly if you're not part of the ones who they're pushing. And you understand why they push them. They're the biggest clicks, the biggest eyes for them. It creates the money. But when you're one of the other clubs within that, it feels unfair. It feels like you're getting pushed to the side to help these clubs be better. No one wants that. You want a fair competition. You want to go into it and think, got a chance of doing something. And I think the problem with the Premier League over the years is that it has taken care of the people who bring the money in for it, more so than other clubs. We've got another vote this week where they're voting to give them clubs even more money, the teams at the top. How can that be fair? And I would hope, it won't happen because it didn't happen at the last vote when the 6 were given extra money. I would hope the 14 other clubs who aren't part of the 6 vote against it and say, no, we all should get an equal share. They won't, because there'll always be the one who thinks, yeah, but we'll break into that 6 and then we'll get the money. And I think that's what's gone wrong with football. But you're absolutely right, the Premier League wants to promote its brand. And this is why I guess, from an Everton perspective, there's an opportunity to damage the brand here in terms of, or highlight the unfairness of this punishment by the brand on one of its stakeholders, one of its members. With that Manchester United game, you couldn't have probably handpicked a better scenario to make a statement, because you got the biggest club in world football, or if not the biggest, the second biggest club in world football, Sky, and every other channel beaming it worldwide. Like you said, under the lights, R4, people are generally a little bit more angry anyway at that time. And you've got this injustice that Evertonians are feeling. Like I said, not necessarily because we've been punished, because if we broke rules, punish us, absolutely. But it's almost as if, like I said before, you rob a Mars bar and it's your first offence and I give you the life sentence because I want to make a stand and say, look how, you know, I can bring justice to people and all of this. That's how it feels. We've broken rules. It's a first offence, as in it's a first offence that's out there, and yet we've been given the harshest ever penalty, which is mind-blowing. And we've got, and I know the cases are all different, but there's 2 very high-profile football clubs who are under investigation. Another one whose takeover is under investigation, but the Premier League have not, you know, was said in the House of Commons from Richard Masters, the Newcastle investigation's ongoing. Well, where's the results of it? Because we've not heard it. But forget about Newcastle, but Man City and Chelsea are clearly up. City have had 115 charges and Chelsea have owned up to all sorts and are under investigation. And yet Everton are the ones who've been thrown under the bus almost for this punishment. And I know a lot of people believe this will be the only time this is ever dished out as well, because they'll be taking on 2 totally different charges, those other clubs, and will get probably financial punishments or whatever. So, and that's why a lot of Evertonians are aggrieved. But if you have got the opportunity to make your voice heard, and with nearly 40 grand in the kitty, then I'm quite sure it's almost like you couldn't have handpicked a better club to play against. Who would also feel aggrieved that their neighbours haven't been done, by the way. So we might get a lot of support from Manchester United on the day. But being beamed everywhere across the world, it is a good opportunity for Evertonians to at least let people know how they're feeling. That's the best, the most diplomatic way I can put it in time for Sunday. I mean, you did just touch on it before we finished, but how do you think Sean Dyche, you see him every week, you're getting to know him a little bit. How do you think he will react to this? Because this is obviously, for want of a better phrase, a kick in the bollocks, because Everton have, like you said, we beat Palace. It was a great away win. We'd moved all our relegation worries, seemed a thing of the past almost. I say. But how does he re-galvanise the players from this perspective? Because all of a sudden, they're back in the bottom three again.
I don't think he'll need any help doing that, to be perfectly honest. I think, obviously, we'll have the press conference later this week, and I think we'll very much get a kind of a closed shop on that. It'll be, it doesn't affect the players and things like that, but behind closed doors, I'm sure that he'll find it quite a powerful tool to help galvanise the players, I think, really, and give them something to fight for. And it might be quite interesting because in the way in which Everton's season was heading, it felt like Everton's season was heading to kind of just a nice mid-table, stable season, the type of season that
where we could sleep in March, Joe.
We've all wanted for so long. And what this does is it almost gives Everton something to fight for again, which they might not have had very soon, because if the club had continued in the same trajectory it's doing and those in the bottom three had continued, well, you'd get to a point where you're safe very early. Well, now I think he'll be trying to use this and harness this and say, look, it is us against the world. You're worth 14 points. He'll say, I think you're worth 20, 21, because I think we know his arguments about earlier on in the season and how underlying performances weren't matched by results. And he'll say, go out and prove that you're not going to take this line down. And so I think that will be a use. I actually think that'll be a useful thing for him to have at his disposal going into a period where it may well have been that there were a few players, or the mentality might have been, I wouldn't say complacency or anything like that, but it might have been a belief that, we're a mid-table side now, so we don't have to worry about what's going on. So I don't think there'll be any issue on the pitch. The only position that worries me, I think, is in a longer term perspective, is that we know that this is still quite a threadbare squad. We know it's still very heavily reliant on a handful of players to make the only system it's really got work. And that isn't a criticism of the club. Like, I think the job that Kevin Farwell and Sean Dyche have done to kind of get everything on a positive trajectory is very, very good. They're just dealing with the circumstances in which they can operate at the minute, and that is, well, we can't furnish a squad with lots and lots of players and a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and what they've done for a plan A is incredibly effective. My only concern is, obviously, we're going to head into December now. It's a very, very difficult December. 8 games, lots of very challenging opposition. And if you were to see one or two of those clubs in that relegation picture start to finally get their house in order, which looks like a long way off, but Bournemouth were just starting to show a few signs of it. And Everton weren't to get an immediate they weren't to continue the form that they had going into this international break. Maybe a couple of players were on 4 bookings, so there's going to be a few periods where big players are out suspended. They're going to come up against strong opposition, and that's my only worry. If that maybe midway through December or a little bit onwards, it goes less about it's us against the world. It becomes more about it's the world is against us. Hopefully, it doesn't get to that point. Hopefully, Everton don't deserve, neither the fans nor the club, the players don't deserve it to get to that point because of the hard work already done and the progress they've already shown. They deserve the buffer that they've built up for December, so that if they had a couple of bad results, they could play very, very well and still lose in several of those games coming up in December. They deserve to have the cushion that they built up. It's been taken away from them. But my only concern is if that happens, if you end up in a really, really grueling December and also the table doesn't get better as quickly as you think it would do, then going into January, Everton will probably still be operating on a budget, whereas you would think Burnley and Bournemouth, having had relatively recent takeovers, might look to kind of spend a little bit more to try and get their way out of it. But I think Everton do stay up ultimately. The question is probably, at what point do they stay up this season? I think everything suggests they could still do it relatively comfortably. But we know that the positive steps, as positive as they've been, have been tentative and are fragile so far. But hopefully they get the opportunity to do what I think has been the club's chief ambition this season, and that is get to a point where Kevin Farwell can prepare for a Premier League season from Easter onwards, so we can get a head start. So almost whatever their budget's going to be isn't as big an issue, because they'll be able to start looking at the free transfer market, have conversations with players, and because next summer represents such an incredible opportunity for Everton to overhaul their playing squad. Probably the first summer that Kevin Farwell can really do that and help build on the progress it looks like it's been made. I hope that isn't taken away from the club, and I think there's a fair argument from the club if it was to say that the nature of this punishment almost means that it's being double, triple punished, because they might lose the opportunity through this points deduction to forward plan for a more sustainable future at the back end of this season. And also, of course, I think it's probably, it's highly likely that it will cost them a few places in the league. It might be a
Merit
difference between
placement,
13th and 16th or something like that. And, with every place, there's £2 million or so of merit payments. And, when we're talking about £19.5 million over a 4-year period here being the difference of 10 points, well, £6-7 million in one season is clearly a big thing. And that's where they have an argument to say that the same punishment which is aimed to deter clubs from being financially irresponsible is also holding back clubs that have had difficult finances from moving forward because you're taking away that opportunity from them.
Absolutely.
It's a very long answer to that question.
No,
sorry.
Listen, there's no quick answers, and I'm sure we'll have you on again, Joe, as we move through this process. Well, hope we do. As we move through this process to its conclusion, and hopefully Everton will be given some points back, which will aid in those things you've just said, make us a little bit more comfortable in what we're doing, and obviously a couple of places higher gets that £4 million back or whatever, which at the moment is being taken, because it does feel like, as well as an excessive points thing, they did say we're not giving you any financial thing because we've done that, but we've gone from 15th down to second to bottom, so quite clearly all of those places are a financial punishment as well. So hopefully Everton do battle and scrap their way out of this, not only on the pitch but off the pitch as well, and get a punishment that we all have to just take on the chin, but one that isn't quite so harsh. Huge thank you to Joe for coming in. Keep reading this stuff. Award-winning journalist. Absolutely brilliant stuff. Let us know what you think in the comments section below. Is the points total excessive? Let us know what you think. I'm quite sure there'll be fans of other clubs saying, no, it should have been more. Whatever. There you go. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't. See you later.